Dawn breaks over the rolling fields of northern France, June 1944. The air is heavy with mist, muffling the distant rumble of artillery. In a shallow depression beside a hedgerow, a squad of U.S. infantrymen crouch low, their uniforms damp with dew, eyes fixed on the horizon. Each man's breath is slow and measured, nerves stretched taut. In their hands, they grip a new weapon, long, slender tubes of steel and wood, the M1 Bazooka. Across the field, the ground trembles. German Panzer foes, their armor streaked with mud, advance in formation, engines growling, treads grinding the earth. Tank commanders, confident in their steel protection, scan the landscape for threats. They see only empty fields and the faint outline of distant trees. But the Americans are waiting. Hidden by the hedgerow, they steady their aim, fingers tightening on triggers. The order is whispered, barely audible above the sound of approaching tanks. The first Panzer draws closer, its turrets swinging, oblivious to the danger. In a single, synchronized motion, the bazooka teams rise, take aim, and fire. A streak of smoke, a flash of light, and the myth of Panzer invincibility is about to be shattered. By the summer of 1944, the war in Western Europe had become a contest of steel and fire. German Panzers, the pride of the Wehrmacht, had earned a reputation for invincibility. From the sweeping plains of Poland to the hedgerows of Normandy, their advance had been relentless. The Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger tanks were more than just machines. They were symbols of German engineering, discipline, and tactical innovation. For Allied soldiers, the sight of a Panzer on the horizon was a harbinger of chaos. The tank's thick armor shrugged off most rifle and machine gun fire. Their main guns could destroy Allied vehicles at 1,000 yards. In the early years of the war, British and American forces had struggled to find effective countermeasures. Anti-tank guns were heavy, difficult to maneuver, and often outpaced by the speed of the German advance. Infantry units, caught in the open, were forced to rely on desperate measures, Molotov cocktails, sticky bombs, and the hope of a lucky artillery strike. The psychological impact was profound. Stories of panzers rolling through entire battalions, of shells bouncing harmlessly off their hulls, spread quickly through Allied ranks. Tank crews, well-trained and battle-hardened, moved with confidence. Their tactics were aggressive, exploiting gaps in enemy lines and striking with speed and precision. The myth of German armored superiority grew with every engagement. Yet, the tide was beginning to turn. The Allies, learning from bitter experience, adapted their tactics. They used terrain to their advantage, setting ambushes in narrow lanes and among the dense hedgerows of Normandy. Air superiority allowed Allied fighter bombers to hunt tanks from above, while artillery barrages softened enemy positions before an advance. Still, for the infantrymen on the ground, the challenge remained daunting. The need for a portable, effective anti-tank weapon was urgent. In response, Allied engineers raced to develop new solutions. The British fielded the Piat, a spring-loaded anti-tank projector. The Americans introduced the M1 Bazooka, a shoulder-fired rocket launcher capable of penetrating tank armor at close range. These weapons promised to level the playing field, giving small teams of infantry the power to stop even the most formidable German tanks. The arrival of the bazooka marked a turning point. No longer were infantrymen helpless in the face of armor. With training, courage, and a steady hand, they could strike back. The stage was set for a new kind of battle, one where the outcome would be decided not just by the weight of steel, but by the resolve of the men who faced it. The M1 Bazooka was born out of necessity. In the early years of the war, American infantry had little to counter the growing menace of German tanks. The answer came from a team of U.S. Army engineers who combined the shaped charge principle of the British anti-tank grenade with a simple, shoulder-fired rocket launcher. The result was a weapon that could be carried by 2 men, fired from cover and, at least in theory, punch through the armor of a Panzer at close range. First fielded in North Africa in 1942, the bazooka was met with skepticism. Early models were unreliable, their rockets prone to misfire, their sights crude and difficult to use. But the concept was sound, and improvements came quickly. By 1944, the M1A1 and M9 versions were in widespread use across the European theater. Training manuals were updated, and infantry squads were reorganized to include dedicated bazooka teams. For the men who carried them, the bazooka was both a promise and a burden. It offered a fighting chance against tanks, but it also required nerves of steel. The weapon's effective range was short, often less than 100 yards. To use it, a soldier had to wait in silence as a Panzer approached, then rise from cover, aim, and fire before the tank's machine guns could find their mark. The risks were enormous, but so were the rewards. German tank crews, once supremely confident, began to take notice. Reports of tanks knocked out by bazooka fire spread quickly through the Panzer divisions. Commanders ordered new precautions: infantry screens to protect the tanks, more aggressive patrolling, and the use of smoke to obscure movement. Some crews welded spare tracks and sandbags to their hulls, hoping to blunt the impact of the American rockets. The engagement that would stun the German tank corps took place in the hedgerow country of Normandy, where fields were divided by thick, ancient earthworks and tangled brush. Here, visibility was limited, and the terrain favored the defender. U.S. infantry, dug in and waiting, could set ambushes at close range, exactly the conditions in which the bazooka excelled. The unit at the heart of this story was a company of the 30th Infantry Division, tasked with holding a key crossroads against a German counterattack. Intelligence warned of an armored thrust, at least a dozen Panzers, supported by infantry, moving to break the American line. The men prepared as best they could, camouflaging their positions, checking their weapons, and rehearsing the plan. Bazooka teams were placed at likely points of approach, their orders clear: hold fire until the tanks were close, then strike with everything they had. As dawn broke, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the courage of the U.S. infantry and the limits of German armor. The events of that day would echo far beyond the battlefield, changing the way both sides fought and remembered the war. For the men assigned to the bazooka, the weapon was both a lifeline and a source of dread. Most were young, barely out of high school, some with only weeks of training before being shipped to the front. The bazooka was simple in theory, but in practice it demanded calm under fire and absolute trust between gunner and loader. Each team drilled endlessly, learning to move as one, to load and fire in seconds, to disappear before the enemy could respond. The fear was real. Facing a Panzer at close range was a test of nerve few could imagine. The ground would shake, the air would fill with the roar of engines and the rattle of machine guns. The teams knew the risks. If they missed, or if the rocket failed to detonate, the tank's return fire would be swift and deadly. Yet, in the moments before battle, there was also a sense of purpose. The bazooka gave them a chance to fight back, to protect their friends, to make a difference in a war that often felt overwhelming. In the hours before the ambush, the men checked their weapons, whispered encouragement, and tried to steady their hands. Some prayed, others remembered the faces of those who hadn't made it this far. When the order came, they moved into position, hearts pounding, ready to face the steel giants that had haunted their nightmares. The hedgerow country of Normandy was a natural fortress. Fields were divided by thick earthen banks, overgrown with brush and trees. Visibility was limited, and every lane, every gap in the hedge was a potential kill zone. The U.S. infantry learned quickly to use the terrain to their advantage. Bazooka teams were placed at choke points, narrow roads, crossroads, and gaps where tanks would be forced to slow down or bunch together. The plan was simple but deadly. Let the Panzers advance, Wait until they were within 50 yards, then open fire from multiple angles. The first shot would target the lead tank, aiming for the tracks or the thin armor at the rear. If the tank was disabled, it would block the road, trapping the others behind it. The rest of the teams would then engage the following vehicles, creating chaos and confusion. Communication was key. Runners relayed orders, and hand signals were used to coordinate the attack. The element of surprise was everything. If the Germans suspected an ambush, they would deploy infantry screens or call for artillery. But if the Americans could remain hidden until the last moment, they could strike a devastating blow. The tension in the moments before the attack was almost unbearable. Every sound, every movement could give away their position. The men waited, breath held, as the Panzers drew closer, unaware that the balance of power was about to shift. The M1 Bazooka was a marvel of wartime ingenuity. Weighing just over 13 pounds, it could be carried and operated by 2 men. The weapon fired a 2.36-inch rocket, tipped with a shaped charge warhead capable of penetrating up to 3 inches of armor. At close range, it was deadly against most German tanks, especially if aimed at weak points. But the bazooka was not without flaws. Early models suffered from unreliable ignition systems and limited range. The rocket's flight was slow and easily affected by wind or obstacles. The backblast could reveal the team's position, making a quick escape essential. Ammunition was bulky, and each team could carry only a handful of rockets into battle. Despite these challenges, the bazooka was a game-changer. It gave ordinary infantrymen the power to destroy tanks, a task once reserved for artillery or air support. With training and courage, a well-placed shot could turn the tide of a battle. The weapon's psychological impact was just as important as its physical effect. For the first time, German tank crews had to fear the hidden threat lurking in every hedgerow. The stage was set. The men, the plan, and the weapon were all in place. The next moments would test everything they had learned and everything they believed possible. The events of that day were shaped as much by leadership as by the men on the ground. American officers, many of them veterans of earlier campaigns in North Africa and Italy, understood the importance of flexibility. They studied German tactics, learned from costly mistakes, and encouraged their men to use initiative. The decision to place bazooka teams at key choke points was not made lightly. It required trust in the discipline and nerve of young soldiers and a willingness to risk everything on a single, coordinated ambush. Orders were clear but left room for judgment. Platoon leaders walked the lines before dawn, checking positions, offering quiet words of encouragement, and reminding their men of the stakes. The plan depended on timing, communication, and the ability to hold fire until the last possible moment. In the chaos of battle, leadership would mean more than issuing commands. It would mean inspiring confidence, maintaining order, and adapting to the unexpected. On the German side, tank commanders relied on doctrine that had served them well for years. They expected resistance, but not the scale or precision of what awaited them. Their confidence in their armor and training was justified by experience, but the battlefield was about to deliver a lesson in the dangers of underestimating a determined enemy. For the Panzer crews, the advance through Normandy was both familiar and fraught with new dangers. They had faced anti-tank guns, mines, and air attacks before, but the hedgerow country was different. Visibility was poor, movement was slow, and every field could hide a threat. Still, their tanks were formidable, and their training was rigorous. Many crews had survived years of combat, developing a sense of invulnerability behind their armor. The first sign of trouble was often subtle: a flash of movement, a glint of metal, the sudden appearance of infantry where none had been moments before. When the first bazooka rocket struck, the shock was immediate. The explosion, the jolt of impact, the realization that their armor had been breached, all combined to create confusion and fear. Crews scrambled to respond, some bailing out, others trying to return fire or maneuver out of the kill zone. The psychological blow was severe. Reports of multiple tanks destroyed in a single engagement spread quickly through the ranks. The myth of Panzer invincibility was shattered, replaced by a new respect for the hidden dangers of the battlefield. For many, it was the first time they truly feared the infantry they once dismissed as powerless. The destruction of 12 Panzers in one day was more than a tactical victory. It was a turning point in morale. For the American infantry, it was proof that courage and ingenuity could overcome even the most daunting odds. The sight of burning tanks, the cheers of comrades, the knowledge that they had stood their ground, all combined to lift spirits and renew determination. For the Germans, the loss was a sobering reminder of the changing nature of war. The tools and tactics that had brought victory in the past were no longer enough. The battlefield was evolving, and survival would depend on adaptation, caution, and a willingness to learn from defeat. The events of that day would echo through both armies, shaping the way they fought and the way they remembered the war. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not just weapons and tactics, but the very will to fight. June 10, 1944. The sun rises slowly over the patchwork fields of Normandy, burning away the last of the morning mist. In the shadows of a narrow lane, U.S. infantrymen lie silent, pressed into the earth, hearts pounding in their chests. Bazooka teams crouch behind tangled hedges, their weapons loaded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The distant rumble of engines grows louder. German Panzer IVs, 12 in all, advance in column, their commanders scanning the fields for signs of danger. The tanks are flanked by infantry, but the hedgerows are thick, and the Americans are well hidden. The lead Panzer rolls into the kill zone, its turret swinging left and right. The tension is electric. Every man knows what is at stake. A single flare arcs into the sky, the signal to begin. The first bazooka team rises from cover, steadies their aim, and fires. The rocket streaks across the lane, striking the lead tank just below the turret ring. There is a flash, a deafening explosion, and the Panzer lurches to a halt, smoke pouring from its hatches. Chaos erupts. The German column grinds to a stop, tanks bunching up in the narrow lane. Bazooka teams on both flanks open fire, targeting the second and third tanks. Rockets slam into armor, some glancing off, others finding weak points. The air is filled with the roar of engines, the crack of small arms, and the shouts of men caught in the crossfire. German infantry scramble for cover, returning fire into the hedgerows. Some tank crews bail out. Others desperately try to reverse or push forward. The Americans reload, working in pairs, moving to new positions to avoid detection. The ambush is relentless, each shot carefully aimed, each rocket a chance to tip the balance. Within minutes, 4 Panzers are burning, their crews scattered or captured. The remaining tanks attempt to maneuver out of the trap, but the narrow lane and blocked road make escape impossible. The Americans press their advantage, shifting fire to the rear of the column, where the last tanks are trapped by the wreckage ahead. The battle rages for nearly an hour. By the time the smoke clears, 12 German tanks lie destroyed or abandoned, their hulks smoldering in the morning sun. The cost is high. Several American teams are wounded or killed, and the hedgerow is scarred by the violence of the fight. But the outcome is undeniable. The myth of Panzer invincibility has been shattered in a single, unforgettable day. The survivors, both American and German, are left to reckon with the aftermath, a battlefield transformed, and a new understanding of what is possible when courage and innovation meet. The smoke lingers over the hedgerow, drifting across the fields as the sun climbs higher. The ground is littered with the twisted remains of German armor, 12 Panzers, their hulls blackened, their turrets blown open by the force of shaped charges. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and scorched metal. For the men who fought here, the world has changed in the space of a single morning. German infantry, stunned by the ferocity of the ambush, fall back in disarray. Some attempt to regroup behind the wreckage, but the loss of their armored spearhead leaves them exposed and vulnerable. Officers shout orders, trying to restore order, but the shock is too great. Survivors scramble to evacuate wounded tankers, dragging them from the burning hulks under sporadic American fire. For the U.S. infantry, the victory is hard won. Bazooka teams move cautiously among the wrecks, searching for survivors and collecting spent tubes. Medics tend to the wounded, their hands stained with blood and oil. The cost is real. Several Americans have fallen, and the price of success is etched into every face. Yet, there is a sense of awe, a quiet disbelief at what they have accomplished. Word of the ambush spreads quickly. Runners carry the news back to battalion headquarters, where officers gather around maps, recalculating the day's objectives. Reports are radioed up the chain of command. 12 enemy tanks destroyed. Position held. Casualties moderate. The scale of the victory is clear, and the impact is immediate. Morale surges among the American ranks, while German confidence is shaken to its core. For the German tank crews, the loss is devastating. Survivors are debriefed, their accounts grim and shaken. They speak of rockets appearing from nowhere, of armor breached in seconds, of a battlefield where the rules have changed. The myth of invulnerability is gone, replaced by a new fear. The knowledge that every hedgerow, every village, may now conceal a weapon capable of destroying even the mightiest Panzer. As the day ends, the battlefield is silent, but for the crackle of flames and the distant rumble of retreating engines. The Americans dig in, preparing for the next attack, their confidence tempered by the memory of what they have endured. The Germans withdraw, forced to reconsider their tactics, their doctrine, and their faith in the machines that once seemed unstoppable. The events of this day will echo far beyond these fields, shaping the course of the campaign and the future of armored warfare. In the hours after the ambush, the battlefield settles into a tense quiet. The American infantry, exhausted but resolute, hold their ground among the wreckage. Officers move from position to position, gathering first-hand accounts, checking on the wounded, and ensuring that every bazooka team is accounted for. The scale of the victory becomes clear as the sun sets behind the smoldering hulks of German armor. At battalion headquarters, the news is met with a mix of relief and disbelief. 12 Panzers destroyed in a single engagement, such a tally is almost unheard of. The after-action report is detailed and sober. Enemy armor neutralized by coordinated bazooka fire. Ambush successful. Enemy infantry repulsed. Friendly casualties. 7 wounded, 3 killed. The names of the fallen are recorded, their sacrifice honored in the company log. Morale among the American troops surges. For weeks, they had faced the threat of German tanks with a mixture of dread and determination. Now, they have proof that the enemy can be beaten, that the bazooka is more than a promise, it is a weapon that works. The men who fired the rockets are congratulated by their peers, their courage recognized by officers and enlisted alike. In the mess tents and foxholes, stories of the ambush are retold, each detail growing sharper with every telling. For the Germans, the loss is a shock. Surviving tank crews are pulled from the line, their vehicles replaced by hastily repaired reserves. Commanders convene emergency meetings, reviewing the circumstances of the defeat. Orders are issued to increase infantry screens, to scout more aggressively, and to avoid narrow lanes and hedgerows whenever possible. The myth of Panzer invincibility is shattered, replaced by a new caution and a growing respect for American anti-tank tactics. The impact is felt beyond the immediate battlefield. Other American units hear of the victory and adjust their own tactics, placing greater emphasis on ambushes and coordinated bazooka fire. Training manuals are updated, and new lessons are passed down to replacements arriving from the States. The success of the ambush becomes a case study in the power of adaptation and the importance of seizing the initiative. Yet, the cost is never far from mind. The wounded are evacuated to field hospitals, the dead buried with quiet ceremony. Letters are written home, some bearing news of loss, others of survival and triumph. The war grinds on, but for those who fought at the hedgerow, the events of that day will remain etched in memory, a testament to what is possible when courage, planning, and innovation come together in a single, decisive moment. The destruction of 12 Panzers in a single day reverberated far beyond the fields of Normandy. In the weeks that followed, the story of the ambush spread through Allied and Axis lines alike. For the U.S. Army, it became a symbol of what could be achieved with determination, teamwork, and the right weapon in the right hands. For the Germans, it was a warning, a sign that the battlefield had changed, and that old assumptions no longer held. American commanders took note. Reports from the front were studied at every level, from regimental headquarters to the Pentagon. The effectiveness of the bazooka was no longer in question. Training programs were revised, emphasizing ambush tactics, target selection, and the importance of concealment. New units arriving in Europe were drilled in the lessons learned at the hedgerow, their confidence bolstered by the knowledge that they, too, could stand against German armor. The Germans responded with urgency. Field modifications became common. Extra armor plates welded to vulnerable spots, sandbags and spare tracks lashed to hulls, and new tactics designed to keep infantry close to the tanks at all times. Orders were issued to avoid bottlenecks and to clear suspected ambush sites with artillery or machine gun fire before advancing. The Panzer divisions, once the masters of the battlefield, now moved with greater caution, their crews ever watchful for the telltale flash of a bazooka rocket. The psychological impact was profound. For American infantry, the bazooka was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of empowerment. No longer were they helpless in the face of steel giants. The knowledge that a well-placed shot could stop a Panzer gave them a new sense of agency and resolve. For the Germans, the loss of so many tanks in a single engagement was a blow to morale and a stark reminder that technological superiority was never absolute. The legacy of the bazooka extended beyond the summer of 1944. As the Allies pushed deeper into France and toward Germany, bazooka teams became a fixture in every infantry company. The weapons design continued to evolve, with improved warheads and more reliable ignition systems. After the war, the lessons learned in Normandy would shape anti-tank doctrine for decades, influencing the development of new weapons and the tactics used to employ them. The battlefield at the hedgerow was quiet now, the wrecks rusting in the sun, the scars of battle slowly fading beneath new grass. But the memory of that day endured, a testament to the power of innovation, the courage of ordinary soldiers, and the ever-changing nature of war. In the stillness that follows battle, the lessons of Normandy linger. The shattered hulks of 12 Panzers, silent beneath the French sky, mark more than a tactical victory. They signal a turning point in the war's relentless evolution. For the men who crouched behind hedgerows, clutching bazookas and waiting for the right moment, the day was a test of courage and conviction. They faced the enemy's most feared weapon not with equal steel, but with ingenuity, teamwork, and the will to adapt. The myth of invincibility, so carefully built by German armor, was undone in a single morning. The battlefield had shifted. No longer could technology alone guarantee dominance. The power of the bazooka was not just in its explosive charge, but in the confidence it gave to those who wielded it. It was a reminder that even the most daunting obstacles can be overcome by those willing to learn, to improvise, and to trust in one another. For the German tank crews, the loss was a sobering lesson in humility. For the Americans, it was a moment of vindication, a proof that the balance of power could change, that the outcome of war was never fixed. The fields of Normandy became a classroom, teaching both sides that adaptation is the true engine of survival. In the end, the story of the bazooka and the 12 Panzers is not just about weapons or tactics. It is about the human spirit, its capacity for fear, for hope, and for transformation in the face of adversity. The echoes of that day would carry forward, shaping the battles yet to come and reminding all who fought that, in war, nothing is truly unstoppable.